They say the American West was built by men with iron in their veins and ice in their hearts. But among the giants of the frontier, one name stands out, not for his size, but for his speed. Not for his cruelty, but for his smile. By the age of 21, he had escaped certain death, outsmarted the most brutal lawmen in the country, and allegedly put a man in the ground for every year of his life. To the newspapers, he was a bloodthirsty demon. To the poor of New Mexico, he was a Robin Hood with a Winchester. But before he was the kid, he was just Henry, a scrawny orphan in a world that wanted him dead or behind bars. This isn't a Hollywood fairy tale. This is the raw, dusty, and violent truth of a boy who chose to live as a ghost rather than die a slave to the law. This is the rise of Billy the Kid. Our story doesn't begin in the sun-drenched deserts of the West. It begins in the dark, suffocating shadows of the New York City slums. Around 1859, a boy named Henry McCarty was born into a world of Irish immigrants, poverty, and disease. Henry never knew his father. He grew up watching his mother, Catherine, struggle against the crushing weight of the city. Seeking a better life, she dragged Henry and his brother across the continent, from the crowded streets of New York to the freezing winds of Indianapolis, and finally, to the silver-rich dust of Silver City, New Mexico. For a moment, it seemed like they had found it. The American dream. But in the West, the sun is beautiful, but the heat is unforgiving. In 1874, the one person who kept Henry anchored to humanity, his mother, died of tuberculosis. At just 14 years old, Henry McCarty was an orphan. His stepfather abandoned him, leaving the boy to fend for himself in a town full of gamblers, miners, and killers. He wasn't a criminal yet. He worked in hotels, washed dishes, and earned a reputation as a decent, polite kid. But a hungry stomach doesn't care about manners. His first brush with the law was almost pathetic. He didn't rob a bank or a stagecoach. He helped a local prankster hide a bundle of laundry stolen from a Chinese laundryman. The sheriff, a man who hated hoodlums, threw Henry in jail just to teach him a lesson. But Henry McCarty wasn't built for a cage. Using his thin frame, he climbed up the chimney and escaped onto the roof. He ran into the night, leaving Silver City behind forever. He was now a fugitive. He was 15 years old. He wandered into the Arizona Territory, a lawless land where he learned the skills that would one day make him a legend. He learned to ride, he learned to gamble, and most importantly, he learned to shoot. It was here, in a dusty saloon in 1877, that Henry, now calling himself Kid Antrim, met a bully named Windy Cahill. Cahill was a blacksmith, a giant of a man who loved to humiliate the scrawny kid. One night, Cahill pushed too far. He pinned Henry to the ground, slapping him and calling him a coward. Henry didn't argue. He pulled a hidden revolver and fired. As Cahill lay dying in the sawdust, the boy didn't wait for a trial. He jumped on a horse and rode toward the New Mexico border. He had crossed the line. He was no longer just a runaway. He was a killer. By 1877, Henry McCarty was a ghost. He was calling himself William H. Bonney now, trying to wash the blood of Arizona off his hands. He drifted into Lincoln County, New Mexico, a place where the land was beautiful, but the law was non-existent. It was here that the kid met the most important man in his life, John Tunstall. Tunstall was a wealthy English rancher who saw something in the young fugitive that no one else did. He didn't see a criminal. He saw a loyal, hard-working young man. He gave Billy a job, a home, and for the first time in his life a father figure. But Lincoln County was a powder keg. Tunstall was a threat to the house, a corrupt monopoly run by two powerful Irishmen, James Dolan and Lawrence Murphy. They controlled everything, the stores, the banks, and the sheriff, William Brady. The house didn't want competition. They wanted Tunstall dead. On February 18, 1878, a posse working for the house cornered Tunstall on a lonely road. They didn't arrest him. They shot him in the head and then killed his horse for sport. Billy was watching from the hills. As the smoke cleared from the rifles of the murderers, something inside the kid snapped. The boy who washed dishes and played the fiddle was gone. In his place stood a man who lived only for revenge. The murder of Tunstall ignited the Lincoln County War. Billy and his fellow cowboys were deputized to bring the killers to justice, calling themselves the Regulators. But in Lincoln, justice was just another word for a gunfight. The Regulators didn't wait for a courtroom. They hunted down the men who killed Tunstall one by one. But their biggest target was the man who allowed the murder to happen, Sheriff William Brady. On April 1, 1874, Billy and his men hid behind an adobe wall in the middle of town. As Sheriff Brady walked down the street, a hail of lead tore through the air. Brady fell, riddled with bullets. It was a bold, daylight assassination. The kid had officially declared war on the government of New Mexico. The assassination of Sheriff Brady didn't end the Lincoln County War, it supercharged it. The House, furious at the death of their puppet lawman, unleashed a full-scale assault. For 5 brutal days in July 1878, the town of Lincoln became a battlefield. Billy the Kid and the Regulators, along with their allies, fortified themselves in the heavily barricaded home of Alexander McSween, Tunstall's business partner. Outside, the House's men, backed by corrupt federal troops, laid siege. Bullets rained down, cannon fire shook the ground, and finally, the House set the building ablaze. As the McSween house burned around them, Billy and a few of his men made a desperate break for it. Amidst the chaos, smoke, and gunfire, they burst out of the blazing building. Miraculously, Billy survived the inferno, but McSween was cut down, along with several others. The Regulators were shattered, their cause seemingly lost. The Lincoln County War was over, but Billy the Kid's personal war had just begun. With his allies dead or scattered, and the law firmly on the side of the House, Billy was no longer just a vigilante. He was officially an outlaw, with a $500 bounty on his head, a fortune in those days. For the next year, Billy lived on the run, moving like a ghost across the vast, unforgiving landscape of New Mexico. He became a master of evasion, hiding in isolated ranchos, befriending local Mexican families who often saw him as a hero rather than a villain. He rustled cattle for survival, always keeping one eye over his shoulder. His reputation grew with every narrow escape. Stories of his incredible marksmanship, his charming smile, and his ability to vanish into thin air spread like wildfire, but the net was closing. Governor Lew Wallace, a former Civil War general, was determined to bring order to New Mexico, and Billy the Kid was a symbol of everything he wanted to crush. In a desperate gamble, Billy even wrote letters to Governor Wallace, offering to testify against the corrupt players of the House in exchange for a full pardon. For a brief moment, it seemed like an accord might be reached. But in the Wild West, trust was a luxury few could afford, and pardons were rarely given to men with blood on their hands. The governor had ulterior motives, and the promise of a clean slate for Billy soon turned into another trap. The hunt was on, and this time, it was personal. By late 1880, the law finally found a man who could match the kid's cunning. His name was Pat Garrett, a former buffalo hunter, an old acquaintance of Billy's, and the newly elected sheriff of Lincoln County. Garrett knew how Billy thought, and he knew where he hid. In December, during a brutal winter storm, Garrett and his posse cornered Billy and his gang in a small stone hut at Stinking Springs. After a short, bloody standoff that left one of the outlaws dead, the kid realized he was trapped. For the first time, Billy surrendered. He was shackled and taken to Mesilla to stand trial for the murder of Sheriff Brady. The trial was a formality. The House still pulled the strings, and the verdict was a foregone conclusion: guilty. The judge looked at the young man and sentenced him to hang by the neck until dead. Legend has it that Billy looked the judge in the eye and replied, "And you can go to hell, hell, hell." He was moved to the top floor of the Lincoln County Courthouse to await his execution. He was kept under 24-hour guard by 2 men who hated him, James Bell and the cruel Bob Ollinger. Ollinger took pleasure in taunting Billy, showing him a shotgun loaded with buckshot and whispering, "The kid will get a taste of this soon." On April 28, 1881, while Ollinger was across the street for lunch, Billy made his move. Somehow historians still debate how Billy got his hands on a pistol. He shot James Bell on the staircase, then he hobbled to the balcony with his legs still in heavy irons. As Bob Ollinger heard the shots and ran back toward the courthouse, he heard a familiar voice call out from above, "Hello, Bob." Ollinger looked up just in time to see his own shotgun staring back at him. Billy pulled the trigger, killing his tormentor instantly. The kid didn't flee immediately. He sat on the balcony, filed off his leg irons, and chatted with the terrified townspeople below. He was the king of Lincoln for an hour. Finally, he mounted a horse and rode slowly out of town, singing a song. He was free again, and the world couldn't believe it. After his miraculous escape from Lincoln, Billy had a choice. He could have ridden south to Old Mexico and vanished forever. But something drew him back to the people he knew. He spent his final months hiding in the shadows of Fort Sumner, dancing at Biley's and visiting friends. He thought he was safe. He thought the law had given up. But Pat Garrett was a man of his word. He hadn't stopped hunting. Garrett knew that Billy was like a moth to a flame. He couldn't stay away from the place he called home. On the night of July 14, 1881, the end finally came. Billy walked into the darkened bedroom of his friend, Pete Maxwell, looking for something to eat. He didn't know that Sheriff Pat Garrett was sitting right there in the dark, whispering to Maxwell. Billy sensed a shadow. He backed away, his hand on his pistol, whispering in Spanish. "Quietness, quietness, who is it?" Garrett didn't answer with words. He recognized the kid's voice. 2 flashes of orange fire lit up the room. The first bullet struck Billy the Kid directly in the heart. He fell to the floor without a sound. The fastest gun in the West didn't even get a chance to fire back. Pat Garrett killed the man, but he accidentally created a god. Billy the Kid was buried the next day in the old military cemetery at Fort Sumner. He was only 21 years old. Almost immediately, the world refused to let him die. Rumors spread that Garrett had killed the wrong man, that Billy had escaped to Texas or Mexico, living to be an old man. Thousands of books, hundreds of movies, and countless songs have kept his spirit alive. Why do we still remember him? Maybe because he represented the wild, untamed spirit of a frontier that was disappearing. He was the orphan who fought the powerful, the outlaw who smiled at death. Billy the Kid didn't just live in New Mexico, he became the soul of the American West, a boy who burned twice as bright and died half as long.